I love the fact that that was a song really about internationalism, yet the tune some people would very much associate with Fair Nation, Come Ronda. And I love rugby, and I've twice been to the Millennium Stadium, and the Welsh fans sing Bread of Heaven to that tune as a kind of national identity. Which leads us, I suppose, neatly, if you like, higher. What is your nationality? How would you describe your nationality? Where are you from? I mean, because the great question we have on this island, or these islands, is, are you English or are you British? Technically, you're both, but which do you use? I don't know how, I guess, I've always thought of myself as British, I think, but I've also always thought of myself as European, because that's because I worked with Americans, and I understood that although we have a common language, I have far more in common with people I don't speak the language of in terms of the way my nation works than I do with Americans. So let's just begin with that thought for you. What is your nationality? On these islands, we have two countries, a principality and a province. And two bailiwicks. Anybody know what a bailiwick is, or where the bailiwicks are?
Jersey.
Jersey and Guernsey are bailiwicks. And I can't remember what the Isle of Man is, because that's something else. I think it might be a parliamentary democracy. But anyway, you know, it has a name. So there are two countries, which is England and Scotland. Wales is a principality. Northern Ireland is a province. Jersey and Guernsey are both bailiwicks. And if you ever see the old passports, it is the United Kingdom of, and it does list all of those things, and it does give something to the Isle of Man. So it's quite an interesting thought, and it's the strangest of countries in many ways. I like the fact that the most northerly county on the mainland of the island of Great Britain, which is the island we're on, is actually Cape Ness. But the second most northerly county is on the mainland. Sutherland, which means south, because that was named by the Norwegians. So it's a strange thing. So I'm thinking about nationhood, not just our own nationhood, but generally speaking, what it is. That's what I want us to be pondering as we go today. Now, I've got two readings. I've not asked other people to do them because they're both quite long, and I practice reading them so you don't get involved. You know what it's if you get a long reading and people do that. So the first reading is probably have to put the password. This is by a man called Russell Schweickart. And he was an astronaut who went into space in 1969. And he wrote this a few years later. It's called No Frames, No Boundaries. So this is, I guess, a reflection from God's art, I guess. What we mean by God, basically, we are there. So, this is what he says. But up there, you go around every hour and a half, time after time after time. You wake up, usually in the mornings, over the Middle East and over North Africa. As you eat breakfast, you look out the window and there's the Mediterranean area, Greece and Rome and North Africa and Sinai, that whole area. And you realize that in one glance, what you're seeing is what was the whole history of humankind for years, cradle of civilization. And you go down across North Africa and out over the Indian Ocean. You look up at that great subcontinent of India, pointed down towards you as you go past it. Ceylon off to the side. Ceylon, forgive me for that. Then Burma, Southeast Asia, and out over the Philippines and up across that monstrous Pacific Ocean, that vast body of water. Never realized how big that is before. And you finally come up across the coast of California. You look for those friendly things, Los Angeles to Phoenix, and on across to El Paso. And there's Houston, there's home. You know. And you look out and you identify with it. And you go out across the Atlantic Ocean and back out across Africa, and you do it again and again and again. And it all becomes friendly to you. And you identify with Houston, then you identify with Los Angeles, Phoenix, New Orleans. The next thing you recognize in yourself is that you're identifying with North Africa. You look forward to it. You anticipate it, and there it is. And that whole process of what you identify with begins to shift. When you go around the earth in an hour and a half, you begin to recognize your identity is with the whole thing. That makes a change. And you look down there and you can't imagine how many borders and boundaries you cross again and again and again, and you don't even see them. There you are, hundreds of people in the Middle East killing each other over some imaginary line that you're not even aware of, that you can't even see. The way you see it, the thing is a whole. The earth is a whole, and it's so beautiful. I wish you could take a person in each hand, one from each side, in their various conflicts, and say, look at it from this perspective, look at what, look at that, what's important? And a little later on, your friend goes out to the moon. And now he looks back and sees the earth not as something big, where he can see the beautiful details, but now he sees the earth as a small thing out there. The contrast between that bright blue and white Christmas tree ornament and that big black sky, that infinite universe, really comes through. And the size of it, the significance of it, it is so small and so fragile. It's such a precious little spot in the universe that you can block the whole thing out with your thumb. You realize that on that small spot, that little blue and white thing is everything that means anything to you. All love, tears, joy, games, all of it. On that little spot out there that you can cover with your thumb. You realize from that perspective, you've changed. There's something new there. The relationship is no longer what it was. You think about what you're experiencing and why. You deserve this? Have you earned this in some way? Are you separated out to be touched by God, to have some special experience that others cannot have? And you know the answer to that is no. There's nothing you've done that deserves this experience. Earn it. It's not a special thing just for you, and you know very well at that moment where it comes through to you so powerfully, you're the sensing element for all humanity. You as an individual are experiencing this for everyone. You look down and see the surface of that globe that you've lived on all this time. You know all those people down there, and they're like you. They are you. Somehow you represent them. You're up there. A sensing element. That point out on the end, that's a humbling feeling. It's a feeling that says you have a responsibility. It's not for yourself. Eye that doesn't see, doesn't do justice to the body. That's why it's there. That's why you're out there. Somehow you recognize you're a piece of this total life. You're out there on that forefront. You have to bring that back somehow. That becomes a rather special responsibility. And it tells you something about your relationship with this thing that we call life. And that's a change. That's something new. When you come back, there's a difference in the world now. There's a difference in that relationship between you and that planet, and you and all those other forms of life on that planet, because you've had that kind of experience. It's a difference, and it's so precious. Archibald MacLeish somehow knew about this step humanity has now taken. He writes that somehow things rather suddenly have changed. We no longer see ourselves in the same way that we saw ourselves before. We see the earth now as it truly is, bright and blue and beautiful, in that eternal silence where it floats. Men and women as riders on the earth together, on that bright loveliness, in the eternal cold Oh, brothers and sisters, we know now that they are truly brothers and sisters. I know that's quite long, but I found that quite powerful when I read it. That whole point that suddenly you don't see the barriers that are so obvious to us. That was, I read that some time ago, and there's a similar talk by Carl Sagan, called Little Blue Dot, which is from even further away. It was when I think Voyager left the solar system. And you can't even see the dot has to be pointed out that among all those little lights, that's Earth. And it's the same kind of perspective. It suddenly makes the so-called differences we have between ourselves seem rather insignificant. So how is it that the world is split up into nations? Well, we've got some history and some ancient historic texts that will give us an idea. One of those ancient historic texts is a history of a country called Israel. We call it the Old Testament, but actually it is the history of Israel. And I find this text about how they, and remember in those days, I guess a nation was usually called a kingdom, because they tended to be ruled. And the people of Israel wanted a king. And this is how it is reported. It's in the book of Samuel, first book of Samuel, chapter 8. Fascinating reading this. So I'm not going to do it in an Israeli accent or in Hebrew.
Yeah, Northern Ireland accent that you did before there was in.
Oh, thank you very much, Brian. When Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn son was Joel, and the name of his second Abijah, and they were judges in Beersheba. Yet his sons did not follow in his ways, but turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, "You're old, and your sons do not follow in your ways. Appoint for us then a king to govern us, like the other nations." But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to govern us." Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, "Listen to the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they've not rejected you. They have rejected me from being king over them, just as they have done to me from the day I brought them up out of Egypt to this day, forsaking and serving other gods. So also they are doing to you. Now then, listen to their voice. Only you shall solemnly warn them, and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them." So Samuel reported all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, "These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen, and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and some to plough his ground and reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He'll take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He'll take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and his courtiers. He will take your male and female slaves, the best of your cattle and donkeys, and put them to his work. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves. But the Lord will not answer you on that day." But the people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel. They said, "No, but we are determined to have a king over us, so that we also may be like the other nations, and our king may govern us and go out before us and fight our battles." When Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them to the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, "Listen to their voice and set a king over them." Samuel then said to the people of Israel, "Each of you return home." And then, because I'm a Unitarian, I don't spend a lot of time, I'm actually quite a Bible scholar and I find it fascinating. So what then happens is the rest of the Old Testament from that point is basically a history of disaster. The kings, there's only one king who is not criticised, and it's not David, because he killed Uriah the Hittite. The king Josiah. No, there is no criticism of Josiah, but the rest of them were basically disasters. So that's what came of that demand for a king. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? So we live in the United Kingdom. So we are still in a kingdom, and we've actually got a king now, which I think for all of us is something new, even at our age. And actually, the United Kingdom is what Solomon and David became kings of. The United Kingdom, that was known as the United Kingdom of Judah and Israel. But then, after David died, his son split, and you got the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah were separate. And really, Israel disappeared and it became Judah. So what made me want to talk about this was 1st of March was St. David's Day. I think sometime next week it's St. Patrick's Day. Next month it's St. George's Day. 2 weeks ago I was in Scotland, and at the end of the month I'm going to France. So that got me thinking about what is this all about. And of course my daughter is now married to somebody French. She works in France, she speaks French, and I think she can become a French citizen next year. She will do. Mainly because that gets her back into the European Union, which is, as Rishi Sunak said about Northern Ireland, what a fantastic place Northern Ireland is going to be. It's got a complete attachment to Europe and to Britain. And then I thought, well, that's what we all have until 2019. So anyway, crazy world that we live in. So that got me thinking about nationhood. And I asked the question, are we English or are we British? What's a nation, what's a country? What I realise is that I live in the state of the United Kingdom. That is the state I live in, because that does my laws. But England is still technically a country, and that creates problems because we've got a country to our north that now people are saying, well, maybe we want to leave. I'd want to leave if I was Scottish, but they are. And I just can't understand why you wouldn't. But anyway, I do understand the other point of view. So they're there, and then you've got the issue of in Spain, you've got the Basques who want to be separate. Lots of people, Turkish Barbers are nearly all Kurdish, actually, if you speak to them. So Kurdistan is a country which has its own language, its own culture, but it's not a state. So that's where things get really complicated. And do you remember when sort of 89? When the wall came down and all that stuff, and suddenly there was this country called Yugoslavia, and there was the history of the First World War about an area called the Balkans, and suddenly they all came back. I didn't know that Serbia and Croatia and Slovenia still existed as entities. Maybe that's my stupidity, but I just didn't know. I went to Yugoslavia and learnt that where I was actually in somewhere called Macedonia. Except you can't call it Macedonia because there's a bit of Greece, which is also called Macedonia, so you've got to call it North Macedonia. So it goes on, it's all very crazy. Because apart from a few rocks in our oceans and Antarctica, if you stand on any piece of land in the world, you're in a country. You're in a state. Why should that be? Over here, you can't come here. This is our land. This is our curlew land. They just do that. Animals cross boundaries, but we have decided that there are boundaries, and you can't go. And I heard an American say the other day, "I'm an expat," she said. That's another name for a migrant. Isn't that interesting? The attitude in your head to expat and migrant. So, the world is divided into countries. And some of the divisions are natural. Mountains divide. Water divides. We became a country sooner than others, really, because we're an island. It was very easy to define where you are. Other divisions are human, but still understandable. Language. I had a holiday one year in the Black Forest. And the following year, because where my daughter lived over on that side of France, the following year we went to Alsace, to the Vosges Mountains. Now actually, if you're on the top of the Vosges Mountains, you look down at the Rhine Valley and over there is the Black Forest. Very similar, except if you're in the Black Forest, Schwarzwald, they speak German, and if you're in the Vosges, they speak French. And really that river at that point is the divide, and you simply cross that border and you suddenly have to speak the other language. And the weird part about that is, because I do actually speak reasonable French, I speak passable German, but you would have thought if I cross the Rhine and here I am in Germany and I say, which I always used to say, I don't bother anymore, do you speak English or French? The answer is, well, I speak English. Even though they're 5 miles from the French border, they still speak English as the language that they use between themselves. Which I think is one of the problems why English people don't learn languages, because everybody else learns English. They don't learn languages, they learn English because that's what will get them by. You can't leave Holland and expect people to speak Dutch. You never hear anybody Dutch saying, "Oh, I'm terrible at languages, mate." Only English people say that, basically because they can't be bothered to learn it. But understandably, because the language I use that gets me, I'm going to Spain later on this year, the language I speak, again, passable, I speak holiday Spanish. I know the word for beer in every language, and I know up to 5 in every language, so I can order up to 5 beers, really. And it's normally beer, but except in Spain it's cerveza for some strange reason. So some languages, some boundaries are to do with language, others are to do with religion. So that would be the boundary really between Pakistan and India, which was a mess. And in fact, they speak, apparently Urdu and Hindi are more or less the same language. It's just if you're a Muslim, you say you speak Urdu, and if you're a Hindu, you say you speak Hindi. But I mean, they are dialects, but they're more or less the same language. I know that because I've got a friend who speaks Urdu, but he was chatting to someone. He said, "Oh, well, I was speaking Urdu, but they understood me because they were speaking Hindi." So there we are. But lots of boundaries are arbitrary. They are created by human beings. And you can tell those because they're usually straight lines. So if you look in Africa, there are lots of straight lines, which means somebody decided that this country was going to be divided from that country, and we'll just draw a line there. And that was only imposed in the 19th century. And you know, we blame Sub-Saharan Africa for being a mess. It was doing all right for itself until we decided to go in there, divide it all up, and tell them you're going to be in a country like the rest of us. And the argument is, well, you can't have a world government, that'd be too complicated. You've got to divide the place up, and then we've all got an entity which we can relate to. Except, anybody know what the smallest country in the world is? I had to look this up.
Vatican City.
Okay, so we're already being European. So the smallest country by population is not in Europe. Where would it be if you think about it? Is it the Pacific Islands? You think that some of the Pacific Islands are countries? Yeah. No, it's Niue. Niue, N-I-U-E. Population 1,620. 1,610, sorry, I've given 10 people, which is quite significant, but there's only 1,610 of you. I mean, they can't really have embassies everywhere because there'd be nobody there. Everybody would be an ambassador in the rest of the world, wouldn't they? Yeah, so that's the smallest country in the world, 1,610. And all the smallest nations, if you look at all islands in the Pacific. The biggest country at the moment, well, there's a debate whether it's China or India, but I'm going with China, which is 1.412 billion. In other words, you can get 87 million NIUs into China. So you can't really compare, you can't say we've divided up the world because we haven't. Nearly a quarter of the world's, I think somewhere towards half of the world's population lives in either India or China. But there is something in humanity that wishes to belong to an entity which is more than just humanity. Yeah? And it starts with a family. And not just the nuclear family. I am very well aware of who are my cousins. And now, as I'm getting older, I've got nephews. And I suppose I'm moving, a generation. There was a generation, I had grandparents and great aunties and uncles, none of them left. And that next generation above me are now, my auntie died a while ago, they're going, and I'm being promoted. It's a strange promotion to get. And so family now is kind of a downward family as well as an across family. So I know I belong to a family. I also live in a village. I've only lived there for a while, but it's becoming I'm very aware of living in the village. That's got its own entity. Before that, I lived in a suburb, and that gave me an entity. I had children who went to a school. So there are all sorts of things that make us feel attached. But I do wonder, but when I went to Scotland, I normally go through Coldstream. I don't know if you go that way. But when you're driving up to Coldstream, you come through a place called Cornhill, which is in Northumberland. Seems to me to have a school, but nothing else. And the reason it's got nothing else is because there are shops in Coldstream. So my guess is if you live in Cornhill, you go to another country to do your shopping, and that's unusual in Britain. That doesn't happen a lot. But there is a little village in Luxembourg, which before Europe became Europe, this was a little village, and if you crossed the river, I've got to get this right, you were in Germany. But if you went down that road there, you went to France. And actually, to get to other places in Luxembourg was a lot harder. So generally speaking, if you wanted to go to the shop, you had to go to Germany or France. And in order to do that, you needed to take a passport. So it was very difficult to live in this village. So they wanted that sorting out. Now, another question, and I know I'm doing lots of these. You have heard the name of that village. Anybody know what it is? It's called Schengen. You know the Schengen Agreement, which is the bit where everybody can move throughout Europe without passports. They did it in Schengen, because Schengen suffered more than any other place in Europe from these arbitrary borders. So, states are odd and they are dangerous. Who killed all those thousands of British soldiers who died in the First World War? I would argue it was the state and it wasn't other German soldiers. There was a decision that that state would go to war. We've got a real problem with war, and our problem is the Second World War, because that was a monstrous war and the enemy was monstrous. But most wars are just because a country decides to go to war with another country. Why should I be more attached to the country than anything else? Now, I am a great rugby fan, and I tested this theory out yesterday. I love rugby, but I have never ever supported England at rugby. I support them at football, but not rugby. I support anybody but England. And I checked this out yesterday. Of the 30 people in the England rugby squad, 25 of them went to private schools. 5 went to a state school. Of the 30 in the French squad, 30 went to a state school. Personally, I feel I've got more in common with working class French people than I do with English upper classes. So I supported France. So I wore this shirt. I support Scotland more, but I do love the way the French play rugby. So I went to the pub wearing this shirt to watch the game. And people but you've got to support England. I don't want to hear all that nonsense. And I was fascinated. Why? Why do I have to support England? I mean, and a lot of these people will live in Middlesbrough and support Manchester United, so I have no idea how that works. But there's this kind of enforced patriotism that we're all meant to have, and that's actually the problem. Because my country do or die. About to be my country, on earthly things above. Whole, entire, and perfect, due to my love. But it's not as simple as that, because I think if I lived in the Ukraine, I'd be fighting. Because it seems to me, now I understand the Ukraine, it does seem to have a right to sovereignty. So, here we are with this problem about nationhood, which I think the writer of 1 Samuel understood way back then, 5,000 years ago, 3,000. There was a problem about nationhood. And I think within the Christian tradition, it's also true that you get Jesus talking about something called the kingdom of God, which is a notion that you really belong to something over and above your country. Not to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, but to God the things that are God. Because he was living in a country which was under occupation by another country. But instead of saying, I'm fighting for this country, he said, no, there's something over and above. And if you're Muslim, there's something called Ummah, where every other Muslim is your brother or sister. So interestingly enough, when the genocide happened in Rwanda, and I can never get it right, I think it was the Hutus and the Tutsis. I don't know the right way around. Yeah, the Hutus and the Tutsis. And basically, all Hutus, not all Hutus, but nobody was standing up to it, nobody was stopping it. And there was this bloodbath going on. For one exception, there was a very small population of Muslims, and they were both Hutu and Tutsis, and they looked after each other because they were their brothers and sisters. So the nationhood of the Ummah was bigger than being whatever tribe you were in. There is a philosophy which exists which says we shouldn't have countries. Countries are a problem, and that if we didn't have countries and we started from the bottom, we could create something much better. But that philosophy is so dangerous to people who run countries that it gets a bad name. Does anyone know what the philosophy of having countries is?
Anarchy, nothing above us.
Anarchy. I'm not an anarchist, but he is. So I printed it on it. But it's interesting, isn't it, that it's not actually what you're told by the people. Oh well, if you have anarchy, it'll all be a mess. That's not what anarchists are saying at all. They're saying no, we don't want that. And I just find it interesting that you almost culturally cannot challenge. I'm not saying you've got to get rid of countries. I'm not saying we need that. What I am saying is, surely it's reasonable to ask questions, as have been asked since time immemorial, about what countries are, whether they're good. You know, what is it if your country is a fascist dictatorship? That tested the German people, the Italians. Were they right? Well, we know the heroes of Germany are the people who are traitors, that's so sure. So it's a really, and that's just something I wanted us to ponder. So let's get, sorry, it's been very wordy, this service, but I tend to find when I'm preparing services, my mind goes everywhere, and I just go down rabbit holes in my own thoughts. So let's stop being wordy for a while, and let's just give a little thought and ponder what it means on those, after that, those thoughts, to be a nation, and then I'll say some prayers. Let's spend some time praying for the nations of the world, particularly for people who live in nations that don't feel part of them. Or gay people living in countries where that is illegal. For people whose colour means they don't have full citizenship. People whose religion is despised in their country. the Republicans in monarchies, monarchists in republics, people who despise the actions of their nation's politicians, and most of all, those who are persecuted for not liking where their nation is going. Perfect peace between nations. Thinking of anywhere where there's war, we're all very conscious of Ukraine, that there are also wars going on. Sit down. Still, I think in Colombia, and tragically in places that one of us have heard of. Let's bring them all together and the words of the Lord today. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, power, and glory, forever and ever.